This is Globo-Fest Europe, Part 2. The increase in trade following the Crusades during the Middle Ages will also result in the spread of the bubonic plague, or Black Death. Plague had occurred throughout history, even affecting Justinian's Byzantine Empire in the mid-500s. However, during the 1300s, a virulent form of plague emerged in China, devastating its population, eventually creating a global epidemic of the disease because of trade. Fleas from infected rats spread the plague bacteria. By the mid-1300s, it had spread to Western Europe, resulting in one-third of Europe's population being lost, a decline in trade and commerce, and many social and political changes. Some scholars argue that the Black Death helped usher in the Renaissance period in Europe around 1348. Other scholars believe that the Hundred Years' War marked an official end to the medieval period when it ended in 1453. Most historians agree that Europe underwent fundamental changes beginning in the 1350s to the 1450s, which we now refer to as the beginning of a period of time called the Renaissance. Beginning in the late 1300s, there was a resurgence of trade that resulted in a wealthy class of merchants and traders, especially in the Italian city-states. Trade organizations called guilds emerged and helped regulate products and prices, as well as help to create standards to educate young people in specific trades. With the decline of feudalism and manorialism in Europe came a commercial revolution and the emergence of a new economic theory called capitalism. People began to invest their own capital or money in entrepreneurial endeavors with the hope of making a profit. In addition to capitalism, new business practices came about by the end of the Middle Ages, including joint stock companies and partnerships. There were new banking systems and insurance brokers. These business practices resulted in social changes across Europe and a decline to the feudal system. The period of time between the 13 and 1500s in Europe is called the Renaissance or rebirth. Most historians agree the Renaissance began in Italy and spread northward. This was a golden age for business, arts, literature, and scientific discovery. A new philosophy called humanism helped drive this movement. Humanism was based on celebrating secular human achievement and capacity, in addition to religious ones. Humanists were interested in examining the human condition by analyzing worldly subject matter and celebrated the ancient Greeks and Romans. The father of humanism was the Italian thinker and writer Petrarch. The Renaissance was characterized by artistic contributions by such artists as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael, and female artists like Sofonisba and Guisola. These artists explored secular and religious subjects, celebrating the human form as did the Greeks and Romans, and employed a new artistic technique called perspective, which added depth to their paintings. Notable literary achievements during the Renaissance included works by Dante Alighieri, like the Divine Comedy, Cervantes's Don Quixote, works by William Shakespeare, as well as works by Niccolo Machiavelli, who was best known for his observations of politicians in the Italian city-states in his work, The Prince. In this work, he concludes that the ends justify the means in politics, and one must be shrewd or a shrewd ruler in order to keep power, stating that it's better to be feared by your people than loved, or they won't truly respect you or obey. New ideas in literature spread during the Renaissance throughout Europe via a new invention called the printing press, developed by German Johann Gutenberg during the 1400s. Movable type printing had first been invented in China and Korea during the 1300s, but Gutenberg's press was an innovation of this technology. The first book printed on the Gutenberg press was the Bible. The availability of books helped increase literacy rates across Europe and helped spread ideas faster. The Italian Renaissance spread northward, with people in Central and Northern Europe experiencing what later became known as the Northern Renaissance, where ideas like Christian humanism developed and inspired people to begin questioning the Catholic Church. The Renaissance, Northern Renaissance, humanism, and Christian humanism later helped launch a religious revolution and counter-revolution in Europe called the Reformation and Counter-Reformation. New philosophies like humanism encouraged people to question the church and its practices. Strong monarchs across Europe sometimes clashed with popes on church doctrine and practices. Additionally, people began to question practices within the church that they found immoral or corrupt. The leading reformer who helped launch the Protestant Reformation was Martin Luther, a German priest who took particular exception to the church practice of the selling of indulgences or the buying of forgiveness. Luther questioned this practice and many others in a list he compiled called the 95 Theses, which he then nailed to the Wittenberg, Germany chapel door for all to see. Later, he was commanded to recant his beliefs, and when he refused, he was excommunicated. Luther later helped establish a new form of Protestantism called Lutheranism. There were many other reformers, including John Calvin, John Knox, and Huldrych Zwingli. The Protestant Reformation resulted in a variety of Protestant denominations. As a result of the Protestant Reformation, the Catholic Church attempted to rebrand itself by launching its own movement, which became known as the Catholic or Counter-Reformation. This rebranding included a church council, which convened to end certain controversial practices like indulgences. This was called to order at the Council of Trent. The church also attempted to educate people and spread Catholicism via religious orders like the Jesuit order, established by Ignatius Loyola. The church also created a court system called an Inquisition to hold people accountable to church doctrine. The Reformation and Counter-Reformation also resulted in an overall weakening of the church in Europe, especially as related to the power it could exert over kings. In England, Henry VIII broke with the Catholic Church when they would not grant him a divorce from his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, and so he established his own church called the Church of England, or the Anglican Church, which in North America is known as the Episcopal Church. He married 6 times. Henry's offspring included his first daughter named Mary, aka Bloody Mary, Elizabeth I, who would be the last of the Tudor family monarchs, as well as Edward VI. The Reformation and Counter-Reformation periods also resulted in an increase in anti-Semitism, religious conflicts across Europe, as well as witch hunts. The 1500s and 1600s were also marked by the emergence of powerful monarchs who claimed their right to rule, they believed, directly from God. These divine right monarchs included Charles V and Philip II of Spain, Louis XIV from France, who was also nicknamed the Sun King. Louis built the famous Palace of Versailles. Other absolute monarchs emerged in places like Russia, where they were called czars. These czars included Ivan the Terrible and Peter the Great, who helped modernize and westernize Russia and built a monument to himself, the city of St. Petersburg, as well as a palace called Peterhof Palace. Other absolute monarchs in Russia included Catherine the Great. Central European monarchs included Maria Theresa of Austria, as well as Frederick the Great of Prussia. These rulers all glorified themselves and claimed a divine right to rule. They were heavily invested in overseas exploration and colonization and fought many wars to compete with one another, including what some historians refer to as the First World War. It was called the 7 Years' War. Many absolute monarchs attempted to justify their rule by philosophies like those of Thomas Hobbes, who wrote a famous book called The Leviathan. Hobbes argued that people are naturally evil and they need a strong monarch telling them what to do. Reaction to absolute monarchs in Europe, or in England rather, was different. The people of England never fully accepted absolute monarchs and forced monarchs to share their power with Parliament. A series of kings both shared and then did not share power with Parliament, ending with a civil war and ultimately a king and queen who agreed to limit their power for the benefit of their people. Following the reign of Elizabeth I, the last of the Tudor family monarchs, power passed to her cousins, the Stuarts. James I ruled without incident, working well with Parliament. His son, Charles I, defied Parliament, even dissolving Parliament at one point. He jailed political opponents and angered Puritans or Protestants. Soon, a civil war broke out, which resulted in Charles I getting his head chopped off in 1649, and England being led by a Puritan dictator named Oliver Cromwell for a time. Following Cromwell, the monarchy was restored, with a Stuart king back on the throne. Charles I's son, Charles II, was given the throne. He worked well with Parliament and passed power to his brother, James II, in 1685. Immediately, James II did not work well with Parliament and was also very Catholic. Parliament members secretly asked James II's daughter, Mary, as well as her husband, William of Orange, to come back to England to kick her dad out of power and then to come take his place. Parliament knew that William and Mary were both Protestant. William and Mary agreed and overthrew James II in a bloodless overthrow that became known as the Glorious Revolution. James II fled to France. Before taking power, William and Mary had agreed to certain conditions set forth by Parliament, including the signing of a constitution called the English Bill of Rights in 1689. The English Bill of Rights effectively established a limited monarchy in England by confirming by law that the monarch must work with Parliament and cannot rule absolutely. William and Mary also signed a series of measures guaranteeing religious tolerance to Protestant dissenters, including the Toleration Act of 1689, although the act did not guarantee the same protection for Catholics. The Renaissance and Reformation periods in Europe will also lead to a period of time during the 15 and 1600s called the Scientific Revolution, in which numerous advances in science will result in widespread questioning of traditional church teachings. One of the most notable of these scientists was Nicholas Copernicus, who provided mathematical proof for the heliocentric model, or sun-centered model, for the universe. This came into conflict with the Church's traditional belief, based on the Hellenistic scientist Ptolemy's geocentric model, or earth-centered model of the universe. Subsequent scientists like Galileo Galilei proved the heliocentric theory using observations from his newly refined telescope. Galileo later had to recant or take back his theory or risked excommunication by the Church. However, his work later, coupled with the works of scientists like Kepler, Descartes, Newton, and Bacon, will result in a new way of viewing the world and attempting to explain natural phenomena using standardized scientific approaches, like the scientific method. The scientific revolutionary period inspired a philosophic revolution centuries later between the 16 and 1700s, in which philosophers attempted to solve government and social problems using the same types of scientific approaches, using observation and reason. This period of time is referred to as the Age of Reason, or the Enlightenment period. Well-known Enlightenment philosophers include John Locke, who believed in natural rights, arguing that if one's government does not respect these natural rights, people have the right to have a revolution and overthrow their leader, replacing it with a leader or government who will respect their natural rights. Other Enlightenment thinkers who furthered these notions of revolutionary behavior and democratic governments included Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who argued for order in society via social contracts, as well as Montesquieu, who called for a separation of powers within any government to prevent tyranny. Enlightenment thinkers will inspire much change globally, including the American and French revolutions, as well as Latin American uprisings. Thanks for listening. Bye.